ever have that feeling? You're,
Yeah.
trying to really get your head around something complex, maybe learning a new language or just trying to sound informed, and bam, the perfect word just disappeared.
Oh, absolutely. That precise term you need for work or that phrase in French or Spanish, it's just gone.
Exactly. You're left scrambling, or worse, you just feel totally swamped by all the new terms flying around. We've all been there.
Hmm.
Well, today in this deep dive, we're tackling exactly that. We're going to unpack the really vital role of vocabulary. It's often overlooked, actually.
Especially in learning English as a foreign language, or EFL, which is our main focus today,
Yeah.
drawing from some really solid research.
Right. So our mission for you listening is to cut through all that noise.
Mhm.
We'll look at the academic research and pull out practical, research-backed ways to really acquire vocabulary effectively.
Think of it as a shortcut, not just memorizing words, but actually mastering them.
And our source material for this is, well, it's quite comprehensive. It's a research synthesis called The Benefits of Explicit Vocabulary Teaching in the EFL Classroom.
Yeah, it's not just one study. It looks at a whole load of research on how vocabulary is taught and learned. It uses the Swedish school system's approach to EFL as a specific lens, but honestly, the insights apply pretty much everywhere.
Okay, so let's get into it. In loads of places, Sweden included, teaching English focuses heavily on function, right? Communication first, rigid rules second.
That's the communicative language teaching approach, CLT. It's built around 4 core competencies.
And I want you, listening, to really tune in to how vocabulary is basically the bedrock for all of them.
Exactly. The core idea of CLT is quite neat, really. It's this philosophy that language learning kind of takes care of itself, as long as you're exposed to the language and get chances to use it meaningfully.
So message and fluency over, perfect grammar.
Precisely. And that first competence is grammatical competence. This is your absolute foundation. Knowing the words, the grammar rules, pronunciation, everything for literal meaning.
And the research is clear. If that's weak.
Communication breaks down. Simple as that. It's like trying to build a house, but you don't have enough bricks.
Got it. Building blocks. Then number 2.
Sociolinguistic competence. This is about adapting your language. Different situations, different people, knowing what's appropriate. Formal versus informal words, politeness, that kind of thing.
Which sounds like you need a pretty wide range of words to pull that off effectively.
I absolutely do. Without a rich vocabulary, you might know what you want to say, but not how to say it appropriately in that specific context. It can lead to some, well, awkward moments.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, number 3.
Discourse competence. This is about putting it all together, combining grammar and meaning to create whole texts like essays or even just longer spoken turns.
So using linking words properly. Things like however, also, furthermore.
Exactly. Those connectors that make speech and writing flow coherently, it requires more advanced skills.
And the last one?
Strategic competence. This is your toolkit for when communication gets tricky. Using strategies, verbal or nonverbal, to fix breakdowns or just make things clearer.
Like rephrasing something, or using a synonym if you can't think of the exact word,
Yeah.
or even using gestures.
Yes, precisely. And what's really striking here, as you said, is how all these competencies, which are absolutely vital for communicating well, they all circle back to vocabulary.
If you don't have the words.
Even the cleverest strategies won't get you very far. Your foundation is shaky.
So when this research talks about vocabulary, it's clearly more than just a list of single words. It sounds much more complex.
Oh, it absolutely is. Much more. We're talking phrasal verbs, like look after or give up. Idioms, bite the bullet.
Right.
Collocations, too, words that just naturally hang out together, like strong coffee, not powerful coffee. And then there's morphology, how base words change.
Like adding prefixes, suffixes, changing verb tenses.
Yeah, or even how a word can be different classes, like record the verb versus a record the noun. It's about how words work, how they combine and flex.
And the research mentions this swinging pendulum in language teaching, that historically teaching methods have kind of struggled with vocabulary.
That's right. Many approaches just haven't quite known how to handle it systematically. And CLT itself, the dominant approach we discussed.
It doesn't give much specific guidance.
Exactly. The source notes that CLT offers limited specific direction for vocabulary instruction beyond just supporting its functional use in communication.
So the big takeaway there is just exposing students to language. Hoping they soak it up is not enough, especially for higher levels.
It seems not. The research really emphasizes the need for both a principled selection of what vocabulary to teach and instruction that encourages real, meaningful engagement with those words. Just passive exposure isn't the answer.
Okay, this is leading us to a really key distinction. How we actually learn words. Is it just osmosis, or do we need to be more deliberate?
The research points to two main paths: implicit and explicit acquisition.
Right, let's break those down. Implicit first. What's that about?
Implicit, or sometimes called incidental acquisition. That's learning vocabulary without meaning to. Your focus isn't on the words themselves, it's on understanding or using the language.
Like when you're reading an article just to get the main idea and you happen to pick up a new word along the way.
Exactly. Guessing from context is a huge part of this. But, and this is a big but, for it to work efficiently.
There's a catch.
Yeah. Learners generally need to understand most of the words already. The research suggests something like 95% of the words in a text.
Wow, 95%, that's high.
It is, and to learn effectively just from context, the research estimates a second language learner would need to read about one graded reader those books with simplified vocabulary per week.
Okay, that sounds like quite a commitment. Do most learners actually manage that?
Realistically, no. Many learners just don't get that optimal level of input or context. So the conclusion is pretty clear. Relying only on incidental learning isn't enough.
It needs a partner.
It needs a complement. Which brings us to explicit acquisition.
Explicit, so intentional learning.
Exactly. A conscious, focused, deliberate effort to learn specific words. Very direct.
Like actively looking up a word in a dictionary. Or a teacher spending class time specifically on key vocabulary in a text.
Precisely. Working with words before reading, during, after, that's explicit. And it kind of contrasts with that pure CLT idea that learning just happens through communication.
Okay. Now, a lot of the research, especially on the incidental side, seems to focus on reading, on getting input through text.
That's true. It's a major area of study.
So let's dive deeper into that connection between reading and explicit teaching. The research mentions read plus versus read only.
Yeah, this is interesting. Read only is just what it sounds like. Students read a text. Incidental learning might happen. Read plus involves reading the text plus some form of explicit vocabulary instruction afterwards.
And the difference is noticeable.
Significantly. Studies consistently show Read Plus is much more effective for actually acquiring vocabulary and recognizing word meanings later on. One study showed a jump from like 38% recall with Read Only to 52% with Read Plus after a week. That's quite a boost.
That really is significant. What about the learner's intention? Does it matter if you know you're going to be tested on the words?
It seems to. Knowing there's a test coming up tends to increase learning, especially of the word forms. But and this is critical for those gains to stick.
Let me guess. Repetition.
You got it. Repeated exposure is absolutely crucial. Without it, that initial learning effort, it may all be in vain, as the research puts it. The memory just fades.
Which is a real challenge, isn't it? If you only have English class once or twice a week, there's a huge gap between seeing a word for the first time and then reviewing it.
Exactly. Retention suffers. This puts more responsibility on the learner to do something outside of class time.
So how best to use that outside time? Any tips from the research on optimizing study?
Yes, definitely. The finding is that short, frequent study sessions spread out over time are most efficient.
Ah, the spaced repetition idea.
Basically, yes. 6 10-minute sessions are better than cramming for 2 30-minute sessions. Little and often beats long and infrequent.
That makes so much sense. It feels less overwhelming, too.
Yeah.
It also connects to another point. Student ownership. Giving students some choice.
Huge impact. Allowing students autonomy, like choosing books they want to read or even some of the words they focus on, creates a sense of ownership. And that really boosts motivation, especially for doing that necessary work outside the classroom.
And it helps them develop strategies for learning how to learn. Metacognition.
Absolutely. Teachers can guide this, helping students plan before reading, monitor their understanding during reading. Do I get this word? Does this make sense? And then evaluate after reading, connecting it all together.
So they become more independent learners.
That's the goal, empowering them with strategies.
And the teacher's role in explicit instruction, especially maybe for students who struggle a bit more with reading. It's more than just handing out a word list, right?
Oh, much more. It's about providing the right kind of support before, during, and after reading. The research highlights some practical tools.
Like what?
Things like vocabulary self-awareness charts. Students rate their knowledge of a word, try to define it, give an example. It shows them and the teacher where the gaps are.
Okay.
Or vocabulary cards, the word, an example sentence, the definition, maybe even a picture. These push for deeper processing than just looking it up once.
This really tackles that vocabulary catch-22 the research mentions. You need words to read well, but reading is how you get words.
Exactly that loop. And the solution proposed is a combination: targeted work on basic, essential vocabulary plus extensive reading, but using simpler materials initially.
Like those graded readers you mentioned.
Precisely, but it requires the teacher to be active, choosing the right words, the right texts, and it definitely requires effort from the student too. It's a partnership.
So moving beyond just reading, how do these explicit methods fit into other classroom activities? You mentioned a receptive productive continuum.
Right. Learning a word isn't just about understanding it when you see or hear it. That's receptive processing, meaning focused. It's also about being able to use it yourself. That's productive processing, form focused.
And that lack of accuracy or variety we sometimes see in learners' language, that might be because they haven't focused enough on the form side, like word endings, tenses.
That's a strong possibility suggested by the research. There needs to be a balance. Extensive reading boosts receptive vocabulary, sure. But the most effective overall development seems to come from mixing explicit, form-focused work with implicit, meaning-focused activities.
A balance.
Mm.
And this ties into something called the involvement load hypothesis. Sounds intriguing.
It is. The core idea is that how well you learn a word during a task depends on how much you're involved with it. This involvement has dimensions. Do you actually need to understand this word to complete the task? There's search. Do you have to actively look for the meaning? And evaluation. Do you have to compare the word with others? Decide if it's the right fit?
More involvement equals better learning.
Generally, yes. And this leads to that counterintuitive point we touched on earlier.
The one about helping too much. If a teacher just gives the answer right away.
It reduces the need and search for the student. They're less involved cognitively. And that might actually hinder long-term retention, even though it feels helpful in the moment.
Wow, so our instinct to jump in and explain might actually be counterproductive sometimes. Does this apply to all levels of learners?
Well, it was initially questioned for beginners, but later research suggests even less advanced students benefit from tasks that require more involvement. It leads to gains not just in understanding words, receptive, but also in being able to use them, productive.
This really makes you think about quality versus quantity of exposure, doesn't it? Is it just about seeing the word lots, or is it about how you interact with it?
The research leans towards how. Deeper engagement seems key, which might explain why some students have tons of English exposure outside school games, internet, but still struggle to reach higher levels of competence. The quality of their interaction with the language might be lacking depth.
So teachers need to be really deliberate about what kind of vocabulary knowledge to focus on explicitly.
Yes. Prioritization is key. Things like spelling, how words are formed, prefixes, suffixes, those common collocations, useful phrases, even secondary or more abstract meanings of common words. Especially focusing on high-frequency words and academic vocabulary that unlock a wider range of texts.
You know, reflecting on this, it really blurs the lines between incidental and explicit learning. It doesn't seem like a strict either-or situation.
You're absolutely right. The research synthesis itself calls the term incidental L2 vocabulary learning potentially impractical.
How so?
Well, even if you don't ask students to learn words intentionally, some just will. They pay attention differently. And vice versa, you can ask them to learn intentionally, but maybe their mind is elsewhere and they don't. It makes studying the effect quite tricky.
And there was an interesting point about familiarity. Texts students already know something about might lead to quick gains initially, but then weaker long-term retention. Why would that be?
The thinking is it takes less cognitive effort. If the context is familiar, your brain doesn't have to work as hard to figure out the new word and integrate it. Less effort, potentially less durable learning.
So familiarity isn't always a guarantee of deep learning. That's important for teachers, and maybe even for us when we choose what to read or learn.
Definitely. Don't assume easy context equals deep learning.
But even in, say, group work or communication tasks, students do still pick up words incidentally without looking them up.
No, yes, absolutely. And interestingly, while words that are explicitly negotiated for meaning, where students stop and ask, what does that mean,
Yep.
tend to be remembered better.
Makes sense?
Many more words are actually learned without that explicit negotiation. Just being involved in cooperative interaction, talking things through, seems to facilitate learning.
It really underscores how demanding the teacher's role is here. Planning these tasks, choosing the right words, finding the right materials. It's a lot.
It truly is. And this connects to a really crucial finding in the synthesis. The research on how vocabulary is best acquired, it's been disappointingly sluggish in working its way into mainstream pedagogy.
So there's a gap between what researchers know and what's happening in classrooms.
A significant gap. Teachers often lack a clear understanding of effective vocabulary teaching methods, and it's not helped by textbooks and official syllabuses, often being vague on the subject.
That raises a huge question then.
Hmm.
How do we bridge that gap? How do we get this vital research out of the journals and into the hands of educators?
That's the call to action, really. The source argues strongly for more collaboration between researchers and educators. We need to work together to figure out how to integrate these effective strategies into real-world foreign language teaching.
But there's still that tension, isn't there? Explicit teaching takes time, and in systems like Sweden's focused on CLT, there's a concern that too much focus on explicit vocabulary work might squeeze out valuable time for actual communication practice.
That's the balancing act. It's a genuine dilemma. How do you fit in effective, explicit instruction without sacrificing the communicative ethos? There's no easy answer, but acknowledging the need for both is the first step.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, what does this mean for you, the listener? You want to learn, gain knowledge, maybe master a language, quickly but deeply without feeling totally overwhelmed. What are the key takeaways from this deep dive?
I think the first big one is active engagement is king. Don't just be a passive consumer.
Right, whether it's an article, a presentation, a new language,
Right.
really interact with the unfamiliar terms. Ask yourself, what does this mean here? How does it link to what I already know?
Exactly. Second, embrace smart repetition. Remember those short, frequent bursts? They beat long, infrequent cramming sessions every time for building lasting memory.
Third, don't shy away from looking things up. That intentional dictionary check, even if it's quick, gives a real boost to understanding and remembering. That little bit of effort makes a difference.
Fourth, context is great, but it has limits. Guessing from context is a skill for sure, but know when it's not enough. Sometimes you just need to deliberately find the meaning, especially for really crucial words.
And finally, maybe the most advanced point. Go beyond just the definition. To truly own a word, think about its form, how it changes, its different endings. Think about its friends, the words it collocates with. And think about its use as formal, informal.
That's what helps you move from just understanding it to actually using it effectively yourself. Production, not just reception.
So here's a final thought for you to ponder. If, as we've discussed, incidental learning and explicit teaching aren't really separate boxes, but more like complementary forces.
What's one small, specific action you could take this week? Just one thing to intentionally engage with a new word or concept you encounter, pushing it from something you just passively recognize.
Into becoming an active, usable tool in your own mental toolkit. Something to think about.